Hello and welcome to this talk on anxiety and professionals. There is an expectation that somehow professionals aren't going to be feeling anxious, but the reality is that professionals bring their human selves into the profession that they have chosen. And with that, they bring their experiences, their life histories, and everything that has taken place, as well as their way of dealing with situations, whether they be the anxiety that is held within, or whether it be how you're going to be dealing with people around you who are very anxious. Anxiety comes in many different forms. It can be in a form of a phobia, where there is a very specific fear of something, such as spiders or open spaces or small spaces. And it can be a more generalized sense of embarrassment or shame, or a feeling of being exposed, a feeling of being found out, a feeling of not knowing all the time of exactly what to do and exactly at the right time to say something or to think of something or to intervene in some way. And with anxiety comes both psychological components as well as physical components. Now, many of us are very aware of the physical sensations of anxiety: heart beating fast, sweaty palms, breathing being quicker, sweating, stomach ache, diarrhea. These can all be symptoms, physical symptoms of anxiety. But the emotional or psychological symptoms can be a sense of stress, a sense of doom, a sense of fearfulness, a sense of darkness or a heaviness that comes into our minds, even a fogginess that you can't get through because that emotional anxiety feels like it's clouding everything. I think what is extremely important is to recognize that as professionals, we are human beings. We may specialize in some area. We may have something particular that we have created, or a framework in which we develop and use our skills. But it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we acknowledge to ourselves that we can be as anxious as anybody else, that we can be as anxious and sometimes even more anxious than the people with whom we are working, our clients, whoever it is out there that we are being responsible for in some way. Once we can recognize that, then we can begin to shift that anxiety. We can begin to shift the expectation that we are different. Now, that sense of difference is there because there's always a sort of power differential, or there is always some sense of us and them, or a sense of being on one side of something and the other side. If it wasn't like that, we wouldn't be in the role of being a professional. It happens, it happens in all areas, whether we are caring for somebody, whether we're a doctor, whether we are scientists, whether we are teachers, whether we're social workers. It doesn't really matter. There is always a sense of professionals are on one side and the people with whom we work in a professional capacity are on the other side. And we find it very difficult to sometimes cross over that sense of it's all right to feel what we're feeling, but we still need to keep the boundaries. And it's when the boundaries start to become blurred or the boundaries begin to shift that we know that something isn't okay. But in terms of that anxiety within ourselves, providing that we can contain it, then it's okay. It might be unpleasant, but it's okay. And the thing is, we're going to bring into any situation ourselves. I work very much from a situation or from a perspective of a biopsychosocial model, which really looks at what we bring in genetically, what makes us up genetically, the psychological factors, the emotions, our family, our internal worlds, our sense of what is going on internally in our own minds. What are the things we're saying to ourselves? What are our own beliefs? What are our own dynamics that are there within us that we play out all the time in our interactions? And then looking at the social component. Our smaller families, our bigger extended families, the communities, the friendships, the culture that we are born into or that we live in. And all these factors come together, and that is what we refer to as a biopsychosocial model. And my way is to also look a little bit more deeper at the psychological components. What drives us? Our dynamics. What's the conscious motivation of what we're thinking and why we're thinking that way, and what we're doing and why we're doing it, and what sort of outcome we're looking for. So that's more of the psychodynamic component of it. And then to help me to manage and to help my clients to manage what is going on around them, I use quite a lot of mindfulness as well. And mindfulness is not just about the practices of meditating or breathing or, sitting, belonging to some kind of group where you all have to do this together. Mindfulness is very much a mindset. It's a sense of bringing an awareness into our lives, an awareness of what is happening now within us and around us in this moment of time. And when we're working as professionals, we need to be very aware of the present, of what we are feeling and responding to in this moment in time. So anxiety, it can creep up on us, or it can be something that really is quite long-lived, that is there almost as part of who we are. Some people are generally just a bit more anxious than others, and most of the time we can track it back. And I think as professionals, we need to have the capacity and the honesty with ourselves to track back where our anxiety comes from and how it has developed and been encompassed into our lives, and how this might be transmitted in how we are working with individuals. And we do always have a sense of somehow we don't want people around us to know what we're feeling, and we don't want our clients to necessarily know how we're feeling. But people do work in different ways. I think that some people are much more willing to talk about themselves, to say to clients, this is who I am, these are my experiences. Other people don't. I don't. I'm very much, whatever I'm doing is about the other person. I am there. I will be engaging with what is happening. But whatever anxieties I might be feeling will remain with me. Unless there's an anxiety that I feel I need to get through and sort out in my own mind, and then I need to sort through it and think about, is there something in the relationship that is going on between myself and the person with whom I'm working? And if it is, then I need to be able to process that and digest it and work with it in a therapeutic way, but not necessarily saying I am feeling anxious because of, but using it in a helpful way. But what about the professional who is anxious, who is taking on all of that is happening in the client situation? And it's not just clients, but it's also in the social situation. Sometimes we are in situations that feel very uneasy. Sometimes we're in situations where, as we have, presently around us, a crisis of, I want to keep a distance from people because I don't know whether they may or may not be infected. But as professionals, we also need to be there, being exposed in some way to the people around us if we're going to be carrying out our job. And we can't do everything online. We can't always assess situations, particularly people like social workers who need to be going in and seeing exactly what is going on. You can't just walk away from situations and say, oh, well, sorry, I think there may be something in the air. I'm going to be leaving now, because that's not really okay. You can't leave vulnerable children in those situations. As professionals, you need to be going in and doing what needs to be done. So how can you and myself and everybody who is in the situation of feeling such a sense of anxiety, how can this be dealt with? How can this be managed in a way that makes it more livable? Whether it be a more immediate sense of anxiety, like in a crisis, or an ongoing wave-like type of anxiety where it's there and it comes and it goes, or it's always there at a low level. And how does that get managed? How does that get worked with? As I said earlier, it's something about being able to acknowledge it and be open enough to saying, I'm going to track back to where this comes from. And it may not always be a pleasant reason or a set of reasons, which it often is. It's often a whole set of reasons that have accumulated over the years. But we need to remember that anxiety is also sometimes a defense. And defenses in their original form or the original definition that it was used, defenses were barriers or boundaries that could keep back anxiety. So defenses are really a reaction to anxiety. And once we start recognizing that and tracking back to what our lives have been about, we get a much better sense of, this is what I do. That may have been the anxiety or anxieties that I was defending against, that I was pushing against, so that that anxiety wouldn't overwhelm me at that point. And then we need to say, am I still anxious? Do I still need to use this defense against that anxiety? Is it still relevant? Does it still play out in my life in a way that has a purpose? Or has it lost its purpose? Do I no longer need to be holding on to that anxiety and trying to push it away, or playing it out in various scenarios? If we start looking at mindfulness and how that can help, I think when we look at the notion of stress, and we know that stress and anxiety often go together, just as anxiety and depression can often go together. When we have the sense of stress within us, it's a physiological response that is coming from an emotional reaction. So something is happening consciously or unconsciously that triggers off something in the brain, and we then get that stress reaction. We're not always aware of it, but sometimes we are. We'll get a knot in our stomach. We'll suddenly have to breathe in harder than we normally would, or we find that we're struggling to breathe. Or we're tense, our shoulders are tight. We may be feeling nauseous. There may be many different physical symptoms that come through with stress. But what happens with stress is that our bodies are reacting to something that it perceives to be harmful or fearful or dangerous. It doesn't have to be a real danger. But if our brains perceive it to be a danger, it will trigger off that stress response. And that will be a secretion of adrenaline and cortisol. And those will then set into motion our hearts beating faster, our bodies preparing itself to run or to fight, or sometimes there is a reaction of freezing. But if we put that aside for a moment, it's usually the fight or the flight response that comes into being. And that is what we sometimes repress. We think, oh no, I can't do that. I can't run. I go into a room. I don't like what I see. I can't always run away. Sometimes I just have to stay there. But your body is activated. It's there, ready. That is why your heart is beating faster. It's pumping blood through more and more to your muscles in your legs and your arms, so that you can run or you can fight the enemy. What's also happening is that it shuts down mechanisms that are not needed immediately, like your digestion. You don't need to be digesting your food while you are fighting the lion that jumped out at you as you walked around the corner. So your body shuts down certain things and activates others. Once that stressful situation has then lessened, your body needs to come down. So the opposite starts to happen. You start to relax, your breathing starts to slow down, your heart rate needs to slow down. You need to start dipping down and coming back to normal. But when we are anxious, we start to dip down, and that's when we often feel a bit tired or even a bit flat. But then something activates it again. The bell rings. There's something that puts us back onto high alert. And so the whole stress response starts off all over again. And that becomes very damaging to us physically, because we start to wear down our organs from this constant secretion of cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline, and we're going up and down, up and down, up and down, and our bodies don't really know what to be doing. And then our bodies begin to suffer. But with that comes the emotional tiredness, or constantly being on high alert and then being exhausted, and again on high alert and then being exhausted. And that process or that sort of cycle that comes about with being anxious is very, very unhelpful. Unhelpful at every level, psychologically as well as physically. And when we can start to incorporate mindfulness, that sense of I am here right now in this moment. I am opening myself to something, to breathing, to a sense of being grounded, to an anchor within us that we find. When we can open ourselves to that, we can start to drop the stress response so much quicker. We can also, and what is so helpful, is that through doing the practices of mindfulness, whether it be meditation and sitting in a much more formal way of doing meditation for 5 minutes or 20 minutes or 40 minutes, it doesn't really matter how long it is, but it's that training process, it's that knowing how to work with your brain and your body when you are meditating, formally or in other ways, by bringing your attention to the soles of your feet, by focusing on an anchor and just bringing the breath to that anchor, whether it is counting in and counting out. It's all about using yourself and using your breathing and getting used to that idea and that way, that physical and mental way of feeling something and being able to step back, of feeling that tension, recognizing it and being able to step back from it. And mindfulness grounds us. It brings us back to ourselves. It brings our breathing back into some kind of regular format. It helps us to surround ourselves with a sense of I'm here and that's okay for whatever is happening. I'm here right now for whatever that right now brings with it. And when we can do that, we just drop. We drop into ourselves. We drop into that sense of, I have a sense of control. I can bring to myself a feeling of equilibrium. I can give myself or draw on that part of myself that will help me to have some balance, to keep perspective, to negotiate whatever situation I am in. And as professionals, we need to recognize that we are human and we bring into our profession our very humanness. But we also need to deal with whatever it is that is going on within ourselves and also as a professional. So have a look at mindfulness. Have a look at what it is, how you can go about it. how you think somewhere it might be able to help you. But it's also about getting to know you, getting to know what sets you off, what is more difficult, what is more pleasant, where can you find your own safe place within yourself. And that is where mindfulness helps you. So I hope that you will take this further and use it in a way that may open up something for you, that will help to balance things out, that will bring some equilibrium in what often feels like chaos. Following on from the talk about exploring anxiety and looking at anxiety in professionals, some questions have come in that I said I would answer. So the first one that's come in is the following. What would you recommend to people who've started feeling safe in lockdown and are now anxious about going back to normal? Well, I think the thing is that a lot of people are anxious about having to go out again, being in shops, perhaps even going back to work, or at some point taking children to school and there being many parents around. What we can do is begin to recognize that this is a reality. We're not being anxious because we're being silly or because we're creating something that isn't necessarily there or isn't necessarily as big as we think it is, which is what we often say to people and try and get them to evaluate it. I think we need to recognize come to the realization that this is something that has affected people and can certainly affect anybody at the moment. Going back to normal, I'm not sure we can go back to normal. I think we are still very much in a phase where we don't know what we can really do and what we need to be doing other than taking the necessary precautions, because the situation is what it is. And I think the responsibility is to know that for yourself, you're doing what you need to be doing. Whether that be re-evaluating what it is that you really want to be going about doing in your everyday life, or whether you want to take extra precautions, or whether it is now time that you need to be getting out a bit more or doing things that you hadn't done previously because you were too anxious. So you do need to ground yourself in, yes, this is a reality, but also there is a risk. And there's a risk getting out of bed in the morning. So now that there is a bigger risk, as long as you can contain your anxiety, don't expect yourself not to feel it, because it is there and it's based on reality. But just try and put some kind of boundary around yourself and say, I know I'm doing what is right for me, or I am doing what I need to be doing at this point in time, and I will reassess it as I go along. I may need to take more precautions. I may realize that in fact I'm being very cautious as it is, or actually I can ease up a little bit because things are shifting, or I'm mixing with people, but very specific people, or I'm always ensuring that I'm doing what needs to be done at this point. So it is about grounding yourself and keeping that anxiety, almost nurturing it in a way of saying, I know you're there, but I can take care of you. Right, so that's the answer to the one question. There are a few other questions. The other one is, how can I go about helping someone when they're having a panic attack? Well, that's not an easy one. I suppose the most important thing is for you to stay calm, because if you become anxious and start to panic, then the person around you who is having the panic attack is going to feel even more anxious. So you want to stay calm, and you want to take the person or keep the person in a relatively safe area, so that, if they're in the middle of the road, you're going to move them across to the pavement and help them to sit down, help them to recognize that, yes, this is very distressing or very uneasy, very uncomfortable, but you're there and you can help them in some way just by being around. Another thing is for you to know that, in fact, people don't die from panic attacks. They may feel as if they're going to die from one, but they don't actually die. So if you have that in mind, then you know that this is just going to take time. It's going to be a period of time whilst the person feels tremendously anxious, but that they will come through it. It will be okay, relatively okay, and that the panic attack will subside. What you can also do is get the person to put his or her hand on the diaphragm, here, just above the navel, above the belly button. And if possible, to close their eyes and to just breathe in 2, 3, 4 and out 2, 3, 4. In 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, and count with the person. And the counting helps to get a rhythm going, and that's why you're doing it. So they begin to shift the anxiety from the tightness to some kind of rhythm, and they have to breathe in and they have to breathe out. Another thing that's very helpful is using a paper bag or a bag of some sort. But of course, people don't always walk around with paper bags, tucked in their pocket. So what you can do, which works almost identically to a paper bag, is to put your hand like that, a very small hole in the hand, and to put your hand like that, so you can see a tiny hole going through around the mouth, okay? And what you'll do is get the person to breathe in really hard through that tight hole, and then push the breath, expel the breath through that very same hole. So they clasp the fingers around the mouth like that, as though it's a bag, and draw the breath in through it and expel the breath out. And this causes a tension when you're drawing in. So you have to pull really hard with your breath, and you have to push really hard to get the air out. And that helps to relax the tightness, because you are drawing in the breath, you're pushing it out. You're not just thinking about, I can't breathe. And that really does help. And it is like having a paper bag, but it's always on hand because it's there. And then, once the panic attack begins to subside, I think that it's helpful to just reassure the person that they're okay, and help them to allow themselves to be in a position where they can breathe. If you like this, it's very hard because you're actually squashing your diaphragm and you're pulling in, your body into a strong state of tension. If there's a possibility of being able to open out a little bit, and that's why putting the hand here on the diaphragm is very helpful, because they have to open out. It's hard to put your hand on your diaphragm when you squeezed in like that. So you would put your hand there, he or she would put his or her hand there, and allow that breathing in and out, in and out. And if the person can repeat the numbers as I was speaking about earlier, in 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, and you're doing it so they can hear the rhythm in your voice, you can slowly begin to drop the numbers if it helps. Okay, let's breathe in 2, 3, out 2, 3, in 2, 3, out 2, 3. And once the person has begun to feel a little bit more in control, let them just imagine that they are breathing all the way down to their feet. And then hold the breath at the feet, feel the weight of the feet against the ground, and then breathe in again. And allow that flow, breathing in, and imagine the breath is going all the way down to the feet, and then all the way up again and breathing out. And we can only breathe into our lungs, but if we can imagine the breath going all the way through the body and then all the way back again, it helps to release the tension. So that should help a bit while the person is having a panic attack and just after that. Right, a third question that's come in is, how do I go about telling my parents I'm experiencing anxiety? I suppose the best thing to do is to be honest, to sit down and say, this is how I'm feeling. You also need to know that perhaps they aren't going to believe it, or they're not going to realize how serious it is for you, or sometimes they may be dismissive. Oh, that's okay. Oh, it's just a little bit of, anxiety. You'll get over it, or something like that. And often people say things with good intentions. They think that it's going to help you to know that you'll get over it. But of course, the reality is that you don't get over it. You need to work at managing it. And perhaps you can be saying to them, look, this is how I feel. I know that it seems strange to you. I know you may not recognize or have noticed it. I know you think it's so peculiar because I seem so confident. Lots of other things. This is what they may or may not be saying to you. But I think if you put across to them, look, I feel anxious, and this is the way I feel, and I wouldn't be telling you I was feeling this way if I wasn't. Then they may begin to say, oh, okay, we need to just listen to what is being said. And you can ask them, you can say, please, if you can just hear me out, that also helps. And then they may say, well, why are you anxious? What are you anxious about? And you can tell them whatever it is that you want to be telling them. You don't always have to go into complete detail about what you're feeling or why you're feeling something. But be honest, because I think the more integrity there is, and the more it feels like you are connecting with your parents and actually trying to communicate something to them, I think the more they may be willing to listen. But if in the event that they don't really understand what's going on, or they don't really want to understand what's going on, I think you need to be willing to say, well, this is the way I feel. You may not believe me, you may not think it is important or serious, but it is, and it is to me, and it does affect my life. So I will be dealing with it in this way or in that way. But if they are more receptive and say, well, what can we do to help, or, what would you like to happen? Then perhaps you could say, well, it's easier if I don't get involved in this, or I am involved with that, or, when I'm being asked to drive on a motorway, it's really hard for me. I would prefer it if I could take the back roads, or if you drove for now until I began to feel more confident about what I was doing. So, also being there with giving suggestions on what can help, because people don't automatically know what is going to help you. They may think they will know sometimes, but most times they don't. Or you can even say, look, I'm not asking you to do anything. What I'm wanting to do is simply explain to you how I'm feeling and how it impacts my life and perhaps my relationship with you, or some of the events that we attend or get involved with. So it is about also thinking some of it through yourself so that you can provide them with something that's a little more processed, a little more evident, that they can then take and use, rather than them thinking, well, what do we do? How do we help? What do we say to you? Do we send you off to the doctor? Do you do this? What about that? And say, well, this is what I've tried. This is what does help. This is what doesn't help. And here are the things that I can ask of you to assist me with. So that may or may not help, but you do need to do some of the work first, because that will help them then to be able to understand what is going on. Another question is, do body and massage therapies help to treat anxiety? If so, how? Well, do they help? I think they help to relax you. I think they help to sort of ease some of the knots that get created in our body, that tension. The massage is very, obviously it's tactile, it is reassuring, it's nurturing, and I think that is good, that is wonderful, and I think it's helpful to have them. I think some people find, if there are different aromas in the room, it helps, or some people find that it helps to ease out, a particular part of their back or their shoulders that they tend to scrunch up. So it can be helpful, but what it's not going to do is stop the anxiety from being there. It may ease off some of the symptoms or some of the, the end points of being anxious. But it's not going to take away that internal anxiety that you're feeling, that anxiety that's going on in your head about yourself or about your environment or about going into work or about dealing with difficult colleagues or asking a boss what to do or the level of stress that you're under. I mean, these are the things that you are going to need to really think seriously about, because it's not what can my parents do, what can a doctor do, what can a pill do. It needs to be about what can I do. Other things may be there to help you, but the important question, in fact, the most important question, is to ask yourself, what can I do to help myself? What can I do to understand my anxiety? Is it about reading up stuff? Is it about going into therapy? Is it about talking to friends? Is it about writing a journal? Any of these things. Do I need to go on medication? Why would I want to go on medication? What are the side effects? What benefits will it give me? Medication has a very important role to play in certain conditions. In most conditions, it plays a role. In some conditions, it plays perhaps a much more specific role. But I think what is particularly important to hold on to is that medication with mental health is not necessarily going to take away the problem. If you're depressed about something, you need to think about, why are you depressed about it and what can you do about it? If you're anxious about something, why am I feeling so anxious? Is this anxiety about a specific person, in relation to my job, in relation to what I feel about myself, what I believe about myself in the world, about my sense of competence, about being in a relationship or not being in a relationship, about my lovability? Is it something I'm carrying with me, this kind of critical voice inside my head that is there, that's saying, oh no, that's wrong, no, you're not standing up straight, no, you're not pretty enough, no, you don't work hard enough, no, you haven't got strong enough muscles? Whatever it is, you need to get to know what it is and to track it, because by doing that you can then unravel it in some way and use different interventions to help yourself. And it may involve medication, but it also may involve therapy. It may involve just sitting in a chair with somebody who's experienced in working with these issues and talking it through, getting to know what it is about and when it emerges and how to manage it. And using mindfulness, also using these techniques, using these ways of thinking about yourself and the world, and that life is transient, things change, things shift. And just knowing that, I think, also helps. So it's about gathering some perspective and, I suppose, negotiating around what is happening and bringing in different bits of awareness and working through stuff and getting to live with stuff. Some people have never been particularly anxious. Other people can track it back to when they were children. And they can remember sitting in a classroom when they were 8 years old and how it felt to be anxious about something. And that has just molded itself in and out of situations and in and out of their perception of themselves throughout their lives until they've reached this particular point. So we are different as people, and different things work with different people. But there is something very helpful about a level of awareness. And that's not about digging and delving and dredging up memories that you don't want to know about, but it is about knowing what is going on and how it affects you in your life, whether it's with anxiety or what very often adjoins it is depression. And whether it's about stress, whether it's about self-esteem, whether it's about resilience, whether it's about negotiating things in a different way, this is what is so important about having some awareness of yourself, how you function, how you go about living in the world, how you go about living in the world inside your own head, which really is going to determine most of what we're going to be doing out in the world with other people. So anxiety is not just something that descends on you. Depression doesn't descend on you. It is something that is created within you and then plays itself out in different ways. So working with yourself is the best way of starting a good foundation of how to manage your mental health, how to manage your anxiety, whether it's in terms of a personal relationship, going back to work, standing up to a boss, talking to clients. It doesn't really matter the situation. It's about what you are going to bring into that situation in your head to know whether or not you can manage that anxiety, the unknown, things that people may say to you, things that people may do. The more you know about yourself, the more skills that you recognize you have inside of yourself, the more things you have created and developed. That capacity to step back, to keep perspective, to breathe, to allow the world to come in, to allow the air, the very source of life, to come into you. And for you to be part of that and allow it to flow through so that whatever it is that is creating this anxiety can be managed. It's not about disappearing, getting rid of. If you can, great. But most of it is about managing it,